What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another Flesh and Blood related video. Unfortunately, this is my fourth time making the video. Previously, I had some bad editions of it. I finally had a good video of it, just to realize that my recording software didn't pick up my microphone the entire time. It made the little bars go up and down, but it turns out that it was picking up the wrong microphone, and it sounded absolutely atrocious. So, to get started, guys, this is a deck list video about Levia, and this is not your typical deck list. I'm not going over every single card. I'm not telling you every single thing about how each of these things interact, all the different cool combos you can do. I want you to solve those combos yourself, find those combos yourself. This is a very complicated list. The reason I don't want to go too in depth about the actual nature of the deck in terms of hey, these are the different combos. There's so many different combos you can run into that me telling you a few of them might lock you into just playing a few of them. So I think it's actually better for me, to, oddly enough, to just give you a general gist of how it pilots and explaining the few odd cards that you might see here that aren't found in other lists. The first thing I do want to start off with, though, guys, is the big cards to the side are my sideboard. I will be linking this list there. Please ignore most of the sideboard. I do not like most of my sideboard, but it is there because those are cards that had been in the list. I cut them, but I kept them on here just to show people where I currently am at in my thought process, in my thinking, cards I am testing, cards that I have had in the list and that are there and are holding spots until I find other things that are better for the sideboard. Right now, the only cards that I say keep in the sideboard are going to be Null Rune Hood, Pummels, and Guardians. Yes, I use yellow Pummels. I think that the pitch value is more important than just the extra one attack. Very few times have I needed that extra one attack to get over. The +3 boon generally is enough to give me that extra damage to make them have to discard a card. Likewise, if I ever just have it and there's not a great hand for me to use it, it's a solid pitch value to either be able to just go in with a Romping Club or just play another 2-cost card that I could play to potentially set up for better hands future. Guardian of the Shadow Realm is going to be a card you're going to want to use against other brute matchups potentially if you feel like you're not going to be able to outrace them. Many times I can find myself racing them pretty okay as long as I get an okay start hand, but I do generally side into Guardians of the Shadow Realm just to have them. Generally over the Shadow of Blasphemy is where I put the Guardians there, just to have them. You don't want too many cards that have no attack value because you need too many of them to be able to be banishable. So even though this card is a fine banish target, it doesn't turn off your blood debt, and that can be problematic if you don't set up your graveyard properly. So for less experienced players, this card can be a bigger detriment. So I'd only use it in the Guardian matchup the most, and then occasionally I would also use it in the Brute or Shadow Brute mirror. And then Null Rune Hood, you're going to have that there just in case you're against a Chain or a Viscera deck. Both of those like to do a lot of individual arcane pings at you. So if that's the case, you want to be able to pitch some blues to be able to block up to 3 or 4, 3 to 6 or however many you decide you need to block up arcane damage a turn. And let's get started in the actual list of the deck itself, though. The main thing that a lot of people are probably looking at here is going to be that equipment. That equipment seems a little bit awkward because it's not saying, hey, you need to run a, Arcanite Skullcap and a Gambler's Glove into a Scabskin's Leather and some Carrion Husk. Yeah, I'm not saying that. You know why I'm not saying that? Because I don't believe that those are the optimal choices. Those are expensive cards that are generally really good cards, and they have a lot of inherent value in Levia. That being said, they don't progress the Levia win con of itself. Scabskins arguably can, and that means that you're only running Gambler's Gloves to make sure your Scabskins don't just lose you a turn. But there's many more ways to find consistency in the deck without having to rely on Scabskins to give you a lot of extra actions. And oftentimes that can be a trap because the only breakable equipment out of those other ones ends up being is going to be your Gambler's Glove and your Carrion Husks. You're never really going to want to break this Arcanite Skullcap, and if you do break it, you feel real bad if you do. I can't say, well, not real bad, but it doesn't feel great. And in that case, then maybe just have the Null Rune Hood, because there's very few matchups where that 3 Arcane Barrier matters. That's going to be in like Kano matchups, and there's not enough Kanos for me to really care about that. So What about the Romping Club, though? A lot of people really like Manible's Claws. Well, Manible Claws are in there because it can set up a Bloodrush Bellows turn. I don't personally give a crap about that. That's a lot of pitch value, for Bloodrush and the two Manibles. That's 5 pitch. That means that's generally going to be a blue and a yellow, and then you have 2 cards in your hand to try to get off your last card. I don't like the inconsistency of being able to use that last card, and so that being said, I don't like Manibles as much. Romping Club costs me 2, I lose 3 damage on it, and then I can potentially make sure I guarantee to play my last card, and that last card's going to have a higher base than 3 attack, and it's going to get the +2 most likely from the Blood Rush, which just means if I have more than a 3 attack, let's say I have a base of 6, which almost all of them are a base of 6, then I'm guaranteed the same damage as it with the consistency of getting out cards from my hand so I don't hold on to too many cards so that I can then not have to be forced to arsenal something I don't want to arsenal just to get a better hand. Because FYI, there are very few cards you actually care to arsenal in this deck. Reckless Swing might be one of those cards. Shadow Puppetry might be the other. But, like, for the rest of these cards, it feels kind of bad to arsenal some. Because most of my cards are chosen for the fact that they have a lot of versatility to block, but they're not defense reactions. So blocking from my arsenal is impossible. So it's oftentimes better to just keep an attack in my hand. And if it has any good pitch value to it, I don't want to arsenal that because that means it's now locked into having to attack. Locking your card in is rough. So unless that card has versatility or doesn't mind being in the arsenal because it only had one purpose anyways, that's okay. So, like, Pulping's going to the arsenal is not bad. Shadow Blasphemy, not the worst thing in the world. But anything with good attack defense value and has that potential versatility can be a little bit rougher to arsenal. And oftentimes you're not going to be arsenaling those cards, hopefully. Anyways, hopefully, if you get a good enough turn, those are the cards that have gone first. But, there's a lot of arguments there as how to use the arsenal in this deck. I personally use it for a lot of my buff spells if I'm going to know for a fact that I'm going to be buffing them up. So Bloodrush Bellows, if I happen to draw into it from something else and I didn't get to use it early, it gets put away for the next turn. Same thing kind of goes for Shadow Puppetry, or maybe Barraging Beatdown Yellow. That one still kind of feels a little awkward to do because you like pitching it sometimes too. Anyhow, for the rest of the equipment, Ebb and Fold, kind of a standard helmet. You'll see it generally as a swap out sometimes, but I like it just because it guarantees that you can banish something of 6 attack or higher. If it happens to be one of your multiple Shadow Brute cards or few Shadow cards, you get to draw a card. So like it's good. It's a way to guarantee you can turn off your you can just turn off your Blood Debt for a turn, and that's useful to have, and potentially cycle a card in case you drew something you really don't want to play. It's perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. It puts itself in the yard, which is also pretty nice to have because you have so many cards that need to banish 3 cards. Having the ability to add that extra card without having to discard something or find a way to block with something you don't really want to block with, guess what? Your equipment is there for that reason. Goliath Gauntlet and Heart Crossstrap filled similar identities in the fact that both of them breaking onto the yard just means that you have more manipulation of what you're putting in there. And so you can kind of count what's going in there without having to recount everything from your previous turn or your previous defense. If you only defend with 1 6-attack card, and then the next turn you Heart and Crossstraps and Goliath Gauntlet into a Dread Screamer Red, well, guess what? Dread Screamer Red gets rid of those. It gets Go again. It comes in for an extra 2 damage. And you've made sure that you've gotten rid of the 3 cards that you needed. There's no real downside to this. Yes, the downside, you don't get to block with your equipment. But as much as this deck likes to defend every now and then, it's not about defending all of the damage coming at you. It's about lowering some of that damage so that the damage you're outputting is higher, so that the turns you have are more explosive to keep the tempo to put your opponent on the back foot immediately, so that your controlling of it is the fact that they're going to have to start blowing resources to stop you because that stuff hurts. Multiple 6-turn attacks, 6-attack turns is pretty decent. Multiple 12-attack turns is really hard to deal with, especially when 6 of it has Dominate. Or 6 of it can just say, oh, guess what? You did 6 of it, and then the second one is 9. Like, there's so many different play lines that you can do because enough of our cards have Go Again, or give Go Again, or give a buff, that it's just going to be explosive damage output, and you're going to be trying to attack with 2 at a time, which means you have to be able to consistently put cards into your yard, keep cards in your hand to use them to pitch to get more cards out. Hoods of the Shadow Beast does a similar prospect to both of those, in the fact that once you have banished something, so for instance, in that Dread Screamer turn, let's say you banished 3 cards and your Dread Screamer didn't get go again, but you really wanted to play another card, guess what? You could pop the Hooves to do it. Or let's say you started off with like Endless Maw in that similar combo, but Endless Maw doesn't have go again. You started off with the Endless Maw, well, you pop Hooves after it to make sure that you gain another action point to be able to play something else or swing with your Romping Club. There's a lot of different things that Hooves can do. On top of that, it gives you Battle Worn 1, so you get to at least block once with it, which is nice. Yes, the blocking of 2 from Scab Skins is better. Yes, Scab Skins reusability is generally going to be seen as better, but there's turns once you've used your Gambler's Gloves where if you roll badly on that Scab Skin, you don't get the action points. You just lose your turn. But guess what, Hooves? You never lose your turn from it. You just may not be able to turn it on. So it's a condition that has to be met, but you're meeting that condition almost every turn. Once you've started rolling in the Blood Debt, you're going to try to be meeting that condition every single turn. So it just synergizes with what your deck is already doing and going with, and it doesn't have a potential downside. And that's a big part of what I did with this list. It's not always looking at, yes, this card has the most explosive viability out of every card. That is an option. Some of those cards are here, by the way. Endless Maw, Pulping, Bloodrush Bellows. Those cards are very explosive. Those cards are very good. That's why they're here. But pretty much every card on the list, other than those, are here for consistency's sake. They are here because they consistently do something that either pushes our win con, or prevents our opponent from being able to react, or doesn't negatively make there be too much randomness. Yes, a lot of these things say random on them, but if you look at them, each of them is giving you that illusion of randomness. They're giving you a lot more manipulation and control than you might initially think. Bloodrush Bellows says, hey, you're discarding a card, and generally, when you're doing a Bloodrush Bellows, if you have a card that's also a buff card in your hand, because it's very unlikely you're going to draw 3 buffs in a Bloodrush Bellow, and if you do, that's a super unfortunate hand, but it's unlikely that's going to happen. But there is a case that maybe, hey, I accidentally drew into a Barraging Beatdown blue and my Bloodrush Bellow, and then 2 attacks. Well, guess what? There's only 3 attacks that don't have more than 6 attack or more. So as long as it's not a Dread Screamer blue in your hand with it, guess what? Oh yeah, I just pitch the Barraging, I go into the Bloodrush, either of these get discarded, cool, it turns on, I draw 2 new cards, and I still have 2 more resource from that Barraging to then play whatever card I play, be it, hey, look, it's a Dread Screamer red, or, oh, I drew into a Dread Screamer blue, let me start off with that one, it's now a 6 attack card that's getting rid of 3 cards, gives me go again to pitch this other card to play the 3rd card. That's pretty good. I'm down with that. I'm okay with this. That's a solid turn, alright? Like, you're not upset with that kind of avenue of play to have happen. And thus, we also just proved that Bloodrush is not that, like, uncontrollable. You have the option to choose what cards you're putting down to pitch, what cards you're going to be looking for, because it doesn't draw you until after it goes off. Cards that draw you before it discards, like Pulping, can add in a little bit of uncertainty unless you can manipulate the top of your deck. But if you're putting in cards to manipulate the top of your deck, that's less cards you have to help play your other cards. There's too much to set that up properly. That adds too much issues in and of itself. Trying to play with maybe the cards that give you opt for, so the turn before you can rearrange the top of your deck to draw into the cards you need, so that last card that's there is just ready to be manipulated for the next turn. It's not great. I'm not saying it's bad, but I don't like that. No. That's a tempo negative turn to make up for a next turn being tempo positive, but then you're just hoping your opponent's doing nothing. No, bad decision making. Let's just try to cut as many of those things that make us discard at random and draw first out of the deck. The reason Pulping's there is that, 6 attack is still something good, opposed to, like, maybe your, Tear Limb from Limb, where it doesn't give you any innate bonus unless its condition gets met. So there's a chance that it just gives you go again, you just wasted 2 and you discarded a card. Cool, you just put 2 cards in your yard to set up for your, banish card. You could do that with Pulping instead, and Pulping still gets to hit for 6 first. And, yeah, maybe no go again, but hey, cool, your next turn's set up a little bit better. I mean, the downside of the pulping is the fact that, oh, cool, I didn't meet its conditions to give it dominate and go again. But if they don't block it with 2 cards from their hand anyways, it gains go again either way. It doesn't have to have dominate. Dominate just allows it to not be, have go, to guarantee it basically has go again. Uh, so your opponent is just in a situation where like this card is good. No matter what, it has a good chance to have go again. Or it pulls 2 cards from their hand. Or it can pull a card from its hand in arsenal. Like, no matter what, this card wants you to have to block it with 2 cards. Because otherwise I get go again and get to go again anyways. This card is good. Like, there's no downside to pulping. It just has a potential upside to it. Even though it has that, oh yeah, you discard random. And that can add some variance to what you want to do with your hand. Because if you discard the wrong card, or a card that doesn't turn on the dominate, that can feel a little bit rougher. But for the most part, this card just adds in extra value for its discard. And that's the whole point. The cards that are here are selected for the fact that they have either versatility or they're just straight up so good that it doesn't matter that they don't have that versatility. Pulping doesn't have versatility. It does one job and it does that one job well. Same thing goes for Endless Maw. I mean, Endless Maw can block, which is not bad, but it doesn't pitch for anything. It costs 3, and you feel bad if you're blocking with it because this is a 9 attack card most of the time, so you want to attack with it. Same kind of thing with Consuming Aftermath. With Consuming Aftermath, it pretty much always has Dominate, because you're almost always going to have a Shadow card in hand. And if you do, you banish it, and guess what? If it's 6 attack or more, which most of the time your Shadow cards are, guess what? You just turned your Blood Debt off for the turn. So it adds too many valuable things in of just the base value of the card itself to be considered bad, even though it only pitches for 1, it costs 3, and gives 2 defense. But it can have Dominate. It guarantees a banish that you get to choose that's not random, and you don't have to banish if you don't want to. And 6 attack. It just has too many benefits, and that's how you need to look at your card. Is there too many benefits? And if you're looking at like a red version of a card and you're like, okay, well, the benefit of it is it only costs 1, it swings for 7, but I have to discard a card. It blocks for 3, okay. Well, is there any way for me to make this better? Well, let's reduce its attack by 1, give it a pitch value extra, and it still costs 1. So it's still a solid card. And it still meets the conditions I need it to meet. Well, guess what? Savage Swing just went up from having its one real big negative being that it was a pitch value 1. You lose 1 attack, sure, but 6 attack still meets the conditions you need. It still does everything you need it to do, and if you ever have to actually attack with it, like as a kind of last-ditch attack, it's a fine attack. Or maybe you have an off turn where you don't want to do Blood Debt because you haven't put any Blood Debt yet. So maybe you just swing with the Savage Swing. That's a fine turn. 6 attack is still nothing to sneeze at. That's a hard hit. Your opponent still has to figure out a way to block it, or they just take 6 damage. And if they just take 6 damage, cool. You just draw back up and you go on the defensive for a turn. It's not a bad card, and it has extra versatility because of, like I said, pitch value of 2, 6 attack, blocks for 3, and only costs 1. Yeah, the downside is you discard a random card, but you're putting 2 cards in your yard. That's perfectly fine to set up for a better turn the next turn. So that's what I want you guys to focus on. That's what I want you to look at. That's what you should look at for deck building. And the biggest aspects this helps you with, maybe it will help you for other ones as well, other decks that you might want to get into. And I just realized that as we're approaching 20 minutes, there's 2 separate cards that I did not talk about that you might be like, one of them you might be like, really, like, why? And then the other one you might be like, okay, I see why that's there. It's in most of these lists. Many of you are probably wondering why Pack Hunt's there. Pack Hunt Red is a just solid attack. Okay, think of it in this manner. I have 2 cards I have a grand total of 9 cards that already have Go Again on them. I have 3 other cards that then give Go Again to the next card. Outside of Hooves of the Shadow Beast, if I manage to banish something to give Go Again, basically give Go Again again. So Pack Hunt intimidates, which means your opponent loses a resource to defend against you. And oftentimes, you can, if they're a defensive deck, you're hitting one of their good defense-oriented cards. If they're not, you're really screwing up maybe, okay, cool, like I have one less card to think about, and that can put pressure on your opponent to think I have to block here. And that Intimidate can set up for other stuff. So let's say you go Shadow Puppetry into Pack Hunt. Guess what? okay, pack hunt's coming in for 7, it intimidates, they lose a card, they have to figure out to block it, it gains go again, and then you pitch another card to then play a Dread Screamer red. So let's say you pitch your last blue card, or you break your Goliath Gauntlet to play your Dread Screamer red, so you can swing in for another 6 damage coming in. So you gain go again from that because you just, hey, look, Shadow Puppetry, Pack Hunter are both in the yard, plus, the cross straps that you just popped to make sure you played your Dread Screamer. Bam, 3 cards gone, one of them 6 or more, Blood Debt's off if there's a Blood Debt card in Banish Zone. Guess what? Dread Screamer's coming in for 6 more, so they just had to block 7. They now have to block 6, and then guess what? You can use that last card in your hand, throw it to pitch, to just swing in with your Romping Club for another 4 damage coming in. So 7, 6, 4. Guess what? That's 17 damage a turn. That's not a bad turn at any way. And is that a super inconsistent turn to get? No. Guess what? You can do that with Dread Screamer. You can do that with Pulping. You can do that with just the Shadow Puppetry in itself, giving you 1 go again. Just swinging with another card is huge, or swinging with your club is decent. Like, it's not a bad card. It limits your opponent's resources, and the inherent downside is it costs 2, but it has 6 attack and blocks for 3. So I feel like, and Intimidate. So it the rest of the card is upside. There's no downside of the discard, and it's just a card that can be put into your yard and you're not upset about it, or you can just pitch it to play a different 1-cost card that's better. And then the other one is Shadow of Blasphemy. I already kind of gave the explanation for Shadow Puppetry. I've given a couple examples of why Shadow Puppetry I think is good, so hopefully you kind of see that one. But Shadow of Blasphemy is a card I am testing still. Like, it's still on my chopping block. It's potentially not going to be in the list. Because, yes, while you get to kind of manipulate and choose how to banish, it has that same issue that Pulping potentially has, which is you're discarding a random card. But if it doesn't go off, it's just a very generic attack. 2 for 6 is not that great. There's other 2 for 6s we could be playing that are also a red. Guess what? Another one we could play would be 2 Hungering Slaughter Beasts, which have a 3 defense potential. And yeah, they have to ban. The only reason this card is in over it currently is that the other one has to banish 3 from the yard, and I already have so many things that banish 3 from the yard that I'm trying to limit that so that I can manipulate it so that the things that are banishing are the ones I can play. So Shadow of Blasphemy currently is in there because there's just not another option that I think really outdoes it so much that it has to be replaced. But there's a chance that if we get a supplemental set, it's a card that gets cut. Or if I really like the pack hunts, it could go down to 1 Shadow of Blasphemy and 3 pack hunts. Right now, both of those cards are kind of in a testing phase. I'm really liking the pack hunt so far. Shadow of Blasphemy, I could live without. I mean, it's not the worst thing, but it's definitely not the thing I always want to see. And there's very few times that I'm finding myself like, I really want to play this card this turn. Unless it's like, oh crap, I really need to play this card this turn because I need to turn off my Blood Debt. And that's kind of the moments where I play Shadow, but other than that, that's the only reason I play Shadow. Other cards that you might be considering, like Writhing Beast Hulk, a lot of people cut that from their lists. Well, I like it a lot because that Dominate is really powerful. And on top of that, it has the versatility of, if I decide to defend with it, it still blocks 3. And it's a 6 card that goes to the yard. So, yeah, even though I can't pitch it for anything great, its inherent value is just there. And majority of the time, if you're playing it, there's a 6 attack card in the yard, it then gains Dominate, but it doesn't have to have a 6 attack card in the yard. It just gains a benefit if it does, and you want to run those cards that gain benefit from it if you can over the cards that don't. And that's kind of the last card I really feel like I have to talk about. Barraging Beatdowns are there to buff all your brute attacks. That includes your club, by the way, because it says specifically brute attacks, not brute attack actions. So, because it doesn't say that, it can be just brute attacks in similar way that Bloodrush does, so that you can pump your Romping Club. So if you go to Barraging, if you're like, Barraging Beat Down, pitch a card, attack with Romping Club. Well, now they have to block your Romping Club with 2 or more non-equipment cards to prevent it from getting a bonus damage. Or they just have a really big defense card to block it all, but I mean, at that point, you're getting either +2 or +3 to the weapon. It's a base 4. It's a solid swing. And it's not the best turn, but, even if it's just kind of like, here's an early poke turn, let's see if I can get this in. It's fine. It sets up for a better turn coming here soon. As for the playstyle of the deck, guys, if you don't have a great, ability to be able to banish stuff to then turn the tempo on early, taking a turn where you just play a card to just play a card, just to be like, here's 1 decent 6 attack. If you pull anything from your opponent at that point, That's fine. That's less cards they have to work with. That's more things that they're burning through. That's harder for them to then stop and deal with you um, later, or maybe turn on their own strategies. So just being able to take out some of the early resources early on before you start going into turning your blood debt on can be beneficial. Or if you just get an explosive early hand, just keep the pace up. For those that are wondering, there is a little bit of like a, hey, this is how you should play this list tied to this list on FabDB. I'll be putting the link down below for those that are interested in it. I know I didn't go super in depth with all the different combos you could do and how to play this deck perfectly, and it was more of talking about the deck building reasons that I did a lot of the things I did. But I think that that adds in a lot of value to how you should play the deck in and of itself to a degree. Because I'm talking about how much versatility there is. That just showcases to you that there's going to be a lot of thought that you have to put into playing this deck. And I want you, the other players that might be interested, to be doing that. You need to be thinking with your full brain when you're playing this deck. Because if you try to autopilot this deck, you can easily make too many mistakes or suboptimal plays that then put you behind, and it'll make it look like it's a bad list. But as long as you're continuously thinking about it, you're looking at your plays, take your time. Shoot, if your opponent starts getting mad that they think you're slow playing, just kind of advise them that, hey, this is a hard to run list, man. Like overall, Levia is not an easy, not an easy hero. If she was an easy hero, she might be up there with Chain and stuff. Yeah, Chain has a lot of combos he has to do per turn, but it's not like there's that many. His cards do one job and one job only. Pretty much every one of his cards have one job and one job only. And if that's the case, it's a very straight line playstyle. It's very predictable. You know what they're going to do. If you have ways to counter it, there's ways to find the counters. If there's ways to counter it, you will find the counters at some point or another. If the deck has so much versatility in it that you have to always think through what's your best play line, it's much harder for your opponent to solve it before you and be able to prevent the stuff that you're trying to do. If one turn you're coming for 18 and the next turn you come in for 6 because you don't have to come in for that 18 again, your opponent might be like more inclined to be like, oh no, I'll let that 6 through because I'm waiting for that next 18 turn that he's going to hit. And then you do another 6 turn, and then they're like, what's going on here? And then they have to start deciding, okay, do I start pitching stuff to this? And cool, you know what? Screw it. I'll just block the 6 here. Well, then they've used a lot of resources potentially to start blocking the 6. Their next attack isn't that great. Let's say they do an attack, you don't take it, and the next turn you come in for another 18, and they're on the fence now, like, oh, I just took 2 turns. I took a turn where the 18 I couldn't block, and then I let the 1-6 through, and then I did block the 6. They're in much more panic mode. They're much more on swinging for the fences at this point, trying to protect themselves. Meanwhile, you're just tempoing out with tons and tons of damage coming in. So you can, take turns where you're like, yeah, you know what? There's only 1 blood debt there. I'll take the 1 blood debt this turn and just go with a kind of, here's a meandering looking attack. And, whatever. I'm just kind of waddling at you with a big stick. Do that. That's fine. Just do 1 play a turn maybe sometimes. But other times, then you just do these big swing turns with Bloodrush Bellows or barraging beatdowns or whatever you can get off. So focus on learning the deck, playing the deck, and figuring out how you like to play it. And I think that's the best part about this particular list too, is there's so many different ways to play it. There's so many different ways to set up to consistent and adaptations you can make to this current list to make it your list. So just kind of experiment, guys. Play what you like. Hopefully this is a great baseline for you. For me, I feel like this is a great baseline for me, and I really like most of the cards I have in this list. Like I said, the sideboard needs some work, so that's probably the first place you want to start to upgrading and figuring out stuff. And then for the equipments, don't be afraid to use these equipments. I feel I have found these equipments are some of my favorite ones to run, and I'd recommend keep using them. And hopefully you guys found this video insightful. If you did, leave a like, maybe hit a subscribe, send me a comment if you have any questions or concerns, or if you want some more personal information about certain interactions within this list, please let me know. And hopefully, guys, as always, I will see you in the next video. And until then, I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, guys.